Oh, another show on fasting. All right. Well, we get more specific here. Yes, we discuss the myths of fasting. Yes, we discuss aging, but cancer in fasting, how to, what to do, different types of fasting, all here with this great interview of a very good friend of mine. And we talk about that history. You'll have to hear it. But his new book we talk about, because I wrote a very nice piece for it. But this show is a must. If you're not fasting yet, a must. If you are fasting yet, still a must. Check it out. Hey, I want to tell you about one of our sponsors, Cyto Detox. Look, podcasts cost money. There's a lot of production going around this, but we are grateful to have Cyto Detox as one of the sponsors. It's so easy for me to talk about the product because myself and my family use it constantly as we practice what I preach. For over 15 years, I've talked about and taught doctors and the public about cellular detox. And I'll tell you, Cyto was a breakthrough. Cyto was a breakthrough for us. And it's changed so many lives. So we're grateful that they sponsor Cellular Healing TV. It makes sense, doesn't it? They should.
If you're listening to this podcast and want to access the amazing Cyto Detox product Dr. Pompa just mentioned, please visit detoxoffer.com. Again, that's detoxoffer.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cellular Healing TV. I'm Ashley Smith, and today we welcome author of the Keto Metabolic Breakthrough and the Fasting Transformation, Dr. David Jockers. Dr. Jockers runs drjockers.com and is the host of the Dr. Jockers Functional Nutrition podcast. You all know we love fasting here on Cellular Healing TV, and I can't think of two better people to have this conversation right now. So let's get started and welcome Dr. Jockers and, of course, Dr. Pompa to the show. Welcome, both of you.
Well, thanks so much. Great to be
here. Well, this is my gosh. I mean, here's a topic that we both love and adore, right? Fasting. And I actually wrote something for your book because I thought, it was such a great book. There's a lot of books on fasting, but a lot of books on fasting that I take some issues with, right? Yours wasn't one of them. But anyways, no, I love the work that you do, David, and we just love you here at Cellular Healing TV. And I've known you a long time. How long have we known each other?
Yeah, I think we met in 2005. I was in graduate school, and we met, started talking, and a lot of things I was doing nutritionally, you had been doing, and you had been starting to teach, and we just really hit it off.
Yeah, and our mutual friend Isaac Jones, and
right.
It's somehow that all came together, and here we are. Matter of fact, you just told me something that blew me away, that you have 4 children now under the age of 5. And I thought to myself, wow, you're living the life, you're living the dream, but I don't want anything to do with that anymore. I've done it. I've succeeded. And I said that my biggest fear is having to start over again, right? My 50-some-year-old wife, she still is able to have kids. God forbid. Wow. Right. Yeah. It's like, because, just the things that we do are keeping her cellular age far younger than mine, I have to admit. But anyways, fasting being one of them. Let me start there with a story about fasting, because I want you to tell your story, right? In the 1990s, I was fascinated by fasting just because I was so anchored in the philosophy of the body heals itself. And, what better way to allow the body's innate intelligence to work is during a fast. So I was reading everything on fasting, and so much so that I was like, just people would come in with certain conditions, and I'm like, well, you just have to fast, and I was just young, aggressive, and all after it. And I did that. I tell a story, and I won't retell it, but there was a woman who fasted over 26 days, and she shrunk her tumor down to a golf ball. Wow. And then she waited some months and then fasted again, and it was inoperable, and she, fixed the problem. So of course that just fired me up even more. The story goes like this. And of course I fasted other people in between that. But then my wife, she was having some hormone problems at the time. She went and got a colposcopy. They looked at it and they said, oh, this is cancer or 1 stage away. you need this, biopsy, etc. They laid out the plan, only for me to say, honey, no way. And she was like, not wanting it either. She says, well, what do I do? I said, fast, of course. And she did. The doctor thought we were Looney Tunes and said these words, I'll never forget, you'll be back. And I said, well, we'll see about that. And you know what? We weren't back. She went back in, and of course, she's had several pap smears after that, all normal. And so that was my start in the fasting in the 90s. So you can imagine my passion, right? So by the way, dude, I was in it when, it was just a bunch of geeks that were running around, probably mostly vegans and vegetarians talking about fasting, but I realized the power then. Okay, that's my story, how I got into fasting. Tell me yours and some of your experiences.
Yeah. So for me, I was the opposite. I was a personal trainer in my early 20s, 6 meals a day, protein shake before I went to bed. And then
I went through that phase too, by the way, but okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And we're both thinner people. Like I'm an ectomorph.
Yeah.
I've got thin shoulders,
Yeah.
right? It's hard for me to maintain muscle mass. I have to lift heavy. I have to eat a lot of protein. And so I thought I'm going to wither away if I do any sort of fasting. And, eating 6 meals a day and then just having a busy schedule. I was going to school full time, working 2 jobs, would be up at 6 a.m., seeing clients, doing personal training, bed at midnight. I just ran into a wall and I developed irritable bowel and I started losing weight. Even though I was lifting, trying to eat as much as I could, I would have intense cramping, constipation, diarrhea. And this went on for, 2 years, and I would have, periods of time.
I remember when you were going through that. I do.
Yeah, exactly. And I met you as I was going through that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on the healing process at that period of time. I came across several different books. One of the first was The Maker's Diet by a mutual friend of ours, Jordan.
Yeah,
Rubin.
love Jordan, man.
That
love
helped
them.
change a lot of my diet strategies and nutrition plans, because I was actually a vegetarian before that. I was a vegetarian that would have whey protein shakes and tuna fish like all the time, to get my protein in. But I actually started doing intermittent fasting just because I felt better. I used to eat
so many
a big bowl of oatmeal in the morning for breakfast. And then I was in graduate school and I had 7 a.m. classes and I was just busy. So I was like, okay, I'm just not going to eat. I would drink water. And I noticed I felt a lot better. And I had lost a significant amount of weight, right? So at my peak, I was about 170 pounds or so. Which is roughly where I'm at right now, 165, 170. And I had dropped down to about 140 pounds. And my blood pressure was always low. I would have orthostatic hypotension. I go from sitting to standing, be really, really dizzy. And during this process, I was in graduate school and we were taking visceral physiology. So I get my blood pressure taken every day. And they're like, oh, it's 90/60, right? And, like in a typical medical field, people will be like, oh, that's a great blood pressure.
Yeah.
But it's actually really bad, especially for your brain, because you're not
really bad, right?
blood pressure to get oxygen to your brain.
And by the way, your cholesterol was probably really low too.
Probably perfect.
And they were probably like loving you for that. And meanwhile, that's another bad sign,
Exactly. Yeah, I was really I wasn't absorbing nutrients effectively. I was really withering away. I was getting weaker. And I started doing intermittent fasting, and I didn't even know the term. Like I had never.
You know what? Back when I didn't know the term either.
Yeah.
Right. We just kind of did it. Right. And so many people like you did it for the reason of like, I just feel better if I don't eat. Right. Yeah. That's what you're doing.
That's what I did. And I would just drink a ton of water. I would bring like a gallon of water with me to class. Excuse me. And something in my throat here. So I'd bring a gallon of water with me to class and I would drink this gallon of water and I couldn't eat until after I drank a gallon of water, and it would actually put off hunger, because we know today that when you fill your stomach, it suppresses the hunger hormone ghrelin and you don't notice the hunger. So hunger would naturally arise usually around like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then all of a sudden I would get really hungry, right? And I would eat from like 3 o'clock in the afternoon until like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And I would eat a ton of calories and I started gaining the weight back and I got strength back. I felt really at my best. And everybody was asking me, what are you doing? What are you doing? And it was interesting because I actually thought it was the water. I'm like, yeah, I'm drinking a gallon of water. It must be the water. It's increasing, it's optimizing the length of my sarcomeres and increasing my contractile strength. I was trying to come up with all these physiology type of answers. And I'm sure the water was helping. I was hydrating, I was detoxifying. But today, and I didn't realize this until about 2008, 2009, when more and more of the research on fasting and intermittent fasting, time restricted feeding started coming out. And you started talking about it. You were one of the first people that started talking about it. That's when I realized, oh, actually what I was doing.
But I was talking about it before that. No one was interested though. That was the problem.
Yeah.
Finally,
Exactly.
when intermittent fasting started, then I was like, hey, people were actually interested in the topic.
That's right. Yep. And that's when I was like, wow, this is actually what's happening. I'm actually doing time restricted feeding. And I would work out in a fasted state, which had an elevation of my growth hormone, which really put me in an anabolic state. And then I would feast after that. And, I was able to gain that weight back, gain that muscle back. And, I was able to heal my gut, never looked back, since then. And, that was really my window into fasting later on. And when I actually started my practice. Now, you remember these days, your first year in practice, especially in the model that we were in, it's like you work 70, 80 hours a week. I was living in my office. I actually built my office out and I had a bed in the back and I was showering across the street.
Isaac Jones would tell everyone those stories, by the way. Like I only know that because of Isaac. Like, oh my God, Jockers, he would go on and on.
So I lived in my office. I showered across the street in a 24-hour gym, and I was literally sleeping in the back of my office under the power panel.
Yeah.
Which you think about the amount of EMFs. And I had an X-ray processor with all the
living a healthy life too.
Coming out in the bathroom right next to me. So I was just getting massive toxicity, stress, EMF, and I ended up developing skin cancer. And so I said, you know what, I've got to figure out what I need to do naturally. And so I looked at my diet, I looked at all my strategies, and I was emotionally eating at night. Like I would work all day, I would be tired, and then I would binge eat on, what people in the health field would say, like these are healthier foods, but they were high in carbohydrates. I would have like Ezekiel bread with coconut oil and blueberries on it or something like that.
Yeah.
And I would eat like 4 pieces, right? So it was just a high carb load right at night.
Yeah.
And so I that's when I actually discovered the ketogenic diet.
Yeah. By the way, that's your book on the left of the screen, the Keto Metabolic Breakthrough. That's another great book that you read. So again, pain to purpose story here, right?
That's right. And I go through my story in detail in that book. But that's actually when I read The Metabolic Theory of Cancer, because you were talking about the cellular healing diet, right? And so, okay, I knew the cellular healing diet, right? I need to dial it in. And that's actually when I came across ketosis and ketogenic diet. I went on an extended fast, ketogenic diet. I bought a home close to my office, shower filter, cleaned up my environment, did a lot of spiritual, mental, emotional work. And I was able to heal naturally from that skin cancer. Yeah. And then from there, I started telling people my story in different workshops I was doing in my clinic. And then people started referring all these different cancer patients into my office and people with different gut issues. And that's when it was like, okay, is this really going to work?
Yeah.
And I had this client, Mike, and he was 30 years old. He had been living in his mother's basement for the last 10 years with ulcerative colitis, couldn't go to school, couldn't work. Just bloody stools all the time. He was withered away. He had tried everything. He was, tried every kind of supplement. And of course, at first I was like, yeah, let's just put him on probiotics and, adjust him and he'll get better. And he wasn't getting better.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you know what? We could just try fasting. And he was open to it. He's like, I'll do whatever I can to heal. And so he started fasting and I was like, well, let's just try a 3 or 5 day fast. And he started doing that. And after 3 days, he had felt the best he had felt in 10 years. Wow. And he's like, I'm just going to keep going. And I was like, okay, well, we'll try 5 or 7 days. After 5 or 7 days, he's like, I just keep getting better every single day. I feel better and better. And he's like, can I keep going? And I'm like, well, I guess you can. Yeah. As long as you feel okay, I guess you can. And he continued to do it. And it was a 24-day fast.
Wow.
And he felt amazing. And then he started refeeding. And over 3 months, gained the weight back, and he started lifting weights and just got buffed, right? At 3 or 4 months, was able to work, go back to school and get his life back. And I was like, wow, this really works. And that's when I started really getting a lot of my clients doing it, teaching it, putting out a lot of content on it. and I haven't looked back since.
It's amazing, both of our stories, right? We saw the results. You know, we loved the education of it, the premise, right? Everything fit into our philosophy. And then we saw the magic around it. You know, I had a guy, he was at one of my past seminars. He was a patient of one of my doctors. And because the seminar was near his house, he came to my seminar and gave his testimony. Now, folks that are listening, you know, don't try this at home, but he went 121. Well, at that point, when he was giving his testimony at my seminar, he was 121 days into a fast. Now, he was morbidly obese. He started on 14 medications. At that point, his doctors thought he was crazy, but yet were willing to supervise the fast because of the medications. And he was just, you know, off all his medications. To their surprise, all his nutrition markers, his inflammation markers, every marker that they could measure was better. It was normal. All right. So, and then at that particular seminar, I was talking about how to know when to break an extended fast. And he literally said, well, man, I'm getting some of these things that are happening right now, right? Like he started to get like a lot more like hunger, that he was like, is this appetite or hunger? His stomach was gnarly, like he was craving food, which is a sign to break a longer fast. His tongue went all types of colors during the fast, but it went back to pink, like just days before that he came to the seminar, which is another sign. But the bottom line is that, you know, his life changed. So when people, there's so many myths about fasting, right? Skinny people like us can't fast. Baloney. Matter of fact, people that can't gain weight, I use it as a strategy to, you know, how to gain weight. And I talk about that in my book. You may talk about it even through your own story. But, you know, the bottom line is, and I think both of us would agree too, that we could never, ever, ever fix the guts today without the strategy of fasting, right? If it were only so simple to give people probiotics, you know, it's not, right? We need the stress of a fast to change the microbiome. But, you know, the myths, right? Skinny people can't fast. You're starving, right? These are all myths about fasting that people have, is why it wasn't popular for a long time. And by the way, David, back then, even when you started interested in fasting, we didn't know about autophagy, right? That's a new concept of how we had a sense that this was happening, that the body was renewing itself, right? And that's what the word means. The body gets rid of bad cells, creates new ones via stem cells. But back then, people criticized fasting because another myth, it lowers your immune system. They said that because on a blood test, you would see this drop in white blood cells. So you thought, oh, that's not good. We didn't realize that the body was recreating new cells, new immune cells that are like, you know, these super cells, right? So, you know, today we know that. Talk a little bit about the book, because it's very different than my book, Beyond Fasting. So if you have my book, you know, it's not a repeat. Trust me when I tell you, there's great things in there. So talk about some of the highlights, and there it is on your left shoulder there.
Yeah, well, you know, you and I both agree that fasting really is the most ancient, inexpensive, and powerful healing strategy known to mankind. It's been something that, you know, all of us have done since our ancestors have done since the beginning of mankind. It's something all of us do. You know, we do it overnight, right? We've all experienced that. And so now in today's society, though, we've got to be more intentional about it. And it can be so powerful. And so in the book, I talk about how you literally can transform your life. And I know you talk about that in your book as well. In my book, I really go into a lot of the research on fasting and how it impacts digestive disorders and actually allows for diversity of the microbiome, helps heal the gut. We talk about autoimmune diseases. We talk about cancer and strategies that you can take there's actually research out on different strategies you can take with fasting when it comes to, you know, utilizing conventional therapies like chemotherapy and radiation. And then you can also confer that to other oxidative therapies that are natural, like hyperbaric oxygen. So there's actually strategies I go through with that have a little bit of research behind them, and hopefully a growing body of research because it's promising. And then also neurodegenerative conditions. And I mean, fasting can have a huge impact on the brain. I talk about all the different mechanisms, from ketone elevation, from stimulating BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, which helps strengthen the different synapses and the neurotransmitter pathways. And I talk about how it downregulates the inflammasome, particularly what we call the neuroinflammasome, which is basically like an amplifying element of inflammation, right?
Yeah.
So rather than like localized inflammation, when the inflammasome gets activated, it just boosts inflammation throughout the whole body, and it's a high level amount of inflammation, because really the inflammasome, when that gets triggered, the body thinks, wow, there's some sort of infection in here that could kill us quickly, right?
Yeah.
And really throughout the history of mankind, systemic infections, so an infection that got into the bloodstream, circulated and got into the lungs, gave us pneumonia or meningitis in the brain, nervous system, killed more people throughout the history of mankind than anything else. When people were in war, or if they, were in a fight, or if they had a fall, they oftentimes didn't die from the initial injury. It was the infection that got in afterwards.
Yeah.
So the body created this adaptation, this inflammatory adaptation, to help protect us. But in today's society, we are getting, we're basically turning on the inflammatory process by telling the body we have low levels. We have, through leaky gut and other mechanisms, that we need to turn on this inflammatory process. And we end up having chronic inflammation, which deteriorates the brain. And so I talk about that in the book, and how fasting is one of the best strategies for turning off the inflammasome and allowing the brain to do what it needs to do, which is heal. And it's the principle that you always talk about, which is the body doesn't need any help, just no interference. We want to remove the interference, allow the body to do what it was designed to do, which is heal and regenerate. So we go through the research on all of those things. I talk a lot about partial fasting in there, which is another great strategy. I know you've talked about it. Particularly if people are concerned about, doing like a water fast or something along those lines. So I go through intermittent fasting strategies, all the different partial fasts, from green juice fasting, bone broth fasting, the fasting mimicking diet, a fat fast, right? Which is another way to do fasting, where you're only taking in fat. You go through all the different myths. And then we also go through challenges people have, because a lot of people have built up a level of toxicity, whether it's gut dysbiosis. And as those gut bacteria start to die off, they shed off their endotoxins, their outer layers. And if you have a permeable gut, if you have intestinal permeability, those endotoxins get into the bloodstream and cause, unwanted side effects like headaches, rashes, hives, dizziness, right? A lot of different issues like that. So we talk about how to clean that up. And then we also have something called fat cell induced endotoxemia, which I know you've talked about as well, where as our body goes into fat burning mode, because we're fasting, so we don't have food coming in, we're not breaking down food from our diet, nutrients from our diet. So we start going into our fat stores to liberate energy. And as we do that, that's where our body stores a lot of toxins. Right? And so now those toxins are released into the bloodstream, and they can cause more inflammation in the system. So there are different ways to help clean up, the fat cell induced endotoxemia, grab these things, but different binders to get those things out of the bloodstream into the gut and be able to be removed. So you don't have these side effects, and you're able to really thrive as you go through the fast.
I think we should hit on that. And I want to move into cancer because of your experience with it. But, you're right on what you're saying, right? In my book, Beyond Fasting, I talk about the fasting trio just to mitigate this problem. And I want to hear some of your tricks as well, because where did that come from? Fasting so many people, you realize some things along the way, right? You said binders. Bind became this product that people would take during the fast and just be transformative. And then we started trying some other things, cytodetox, right? When you have a lot of systemic stuff, we realized that helped. And then hydrogen, molecular hydrogen, it knocks down these hydroxy-free radicals from, like you said, infection, gives off a lot of this, and lowering that with hydrogen, molecular hydrogen seemed to work. So that became known as the fasting trio for these people. Tell us some of your tricks that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, really the same things. Now, well, when it comes to gut cell-induced endotoxemia, one of the biggest things, and this is huge for success on your fast, is good bowel motility, especially like if you're doing an extended fast. That first day, you need to be moving your bowels at least once, if not, 2 or 3 times. You really want to clear out. When you clear out well, you feel so much better. We have a certain threshold when it comes to our overall load of, our bacterial load, right? So we have this certain bacterial load and endotoxin load. And when we go over that threshold, we don't feel good.
Yep.
And so we've got to be flushing these things out. So magnesium can really help, right?
Yeah.
So just taking some extra magnesium, things like activated charcoal and bentonite clay and different things like that, different binders can really help grab up these endotoxins. They can have a slightly constipating effect for some individuals that are more sensitive. So magnesium is a really key player there. You know,
by the way, that's why magnesium is in bind for that reason. And it's cheap magnesium, hydroxide oxide, because we have these binders in there and you have to keep them moving through. Otherwise you get in trouble there. So you're right.
Yeah, super key. Things like ginger tea, and in fact, just drinking warm water. So actually just warm, you can do warm lemon water, warm ginger tea. You can do warm salt water if you want.
Yeah.
And a lot of people feel great doing coffee, helping moving their bowels. Coffee, actually, the caffeine will help stimulate the colon. But if you don't want to do that, if you just want to do like a pure fast, just drinking like warm salt water, warmth will actually stimulate your vagus nerve, which stimulates peristalsis. Yeah. You'll feel more calm, more relaxed, more focused if you do that in the morning, and you'll have good bowel movements doing that. And so that's one of the best hacks, along with the magnesium supplementation. So doing that, you really want to make sure you're moving your bowels, okay? And even really, if you're doing an extended fast, those first 3 days in particular, you should be moving your bowels every single day, even though you haven't eaten in 2 days. You're still clearing out what's left in there, along with different bacterial debris, just getting that stuff out. For some people, they may have a little bit of loose stools. That's okay as long as you're replacing it. If you notice that happening, replacing it, making sure you're getting a little bit of salts in your system. You just need to flush out. I mean, that's probably the most important thing in the beginning, to get those endotoxins out. And then when it comes to the fat cell induced endotoxemia, binders, zeolite, right? Like, your True Cellular Detox program does, a Cyto Detox. That's a great one. Fulvic and humic acids can be really helpful.
They're in bind for that reason. They bind up a lot of the biotoxins.
Absolutely, right? Drinking hydrogen water. So I know you like the molecular hydrogen. You could get tablets, or you can just get a hydrogen.
Yeah, no, hydrogen water machines I have one.
Yeah,
they're fantastic.
Yeah, exactly, right? So you're drinking that, and that's going to really help to, basically neutralize the hydroxyl free radicals that are formed there. So that can be helpful. For some individuals, glutathione, like a liposomal glutathione or something like that, acetylated glutathione can be helpful to help support that. So those would all be the best products to be taking. And I know you have a great protocol that you've worked with a lot of people, and I go through some of those same strategies and ideas in the book for helping deal with fat cell induced endotoxemia. So those are 2 big things to look out for. And then just making sure that you have enough minerals, because when you fast, your insulin levels drop. And in our society, we talk, there's so much talk about, salt really has been demonized. Sodium has been demonized, and people are put on low salt diets. And a low salt diet, if you're on a high carbohydrate diet, taking the salt down will help reduce your blood pressure if you have high insulin and hypertension. However, it's really not getting to the root cause, because the root cause is insulin, high insulin. And high insulin causes sodium retention, meaning that you retain sodium. When you retain sodium, you also retain water, which causes more pressure in your blood vessels. So when insulin goes down, when you're fasting, you start excreting and peeing out the sodium. So you actually need more salts, especially after a while, your body adapts to it. When you're adapted to getting into ketosis and intermittent fasting, you don't need to do as much salt. But in the beginning, when you first get started with this, you need to be really careful with that. Yeah. Right. And so actually being intentional about doing something like 1 to 2 teaspoons of salt a day, right? You just break it up. Like if you do it all at once, you're just going to purge your bowels. It's not really the best way. You break it up throughout the day. And that will help replace those salts, which is really important. Now, if you're doing intermittent fasting, you don't necessarily need to do that. You can do it, especially if you feel dizzy, if you feel like lightheaded, not as energized. But if you feel good during your intermittent fast, you don't have to take extra salt. You could just make sure you salt your foods well and eat a lot of foods in your feeding window that are very rich in trace minerals. Things like sea vegetables, wild caught fish, grass-fed meats, celery, cucumbers, green leafy vegetables, olives, sauerkraut, right? Different things like that that are naturally rich in sodium and trace minerals. And that should supply your needs. In fact, a lot of people notice that they just crave these things.
Yeah.
Right. Like one of the big things I'll oftentimes crave, especially if I'm doing like every week, I do a 1-day fast, 24-hour fast.
Yeah. So
In fact, I just started it. I eat lunch on Wednesday and then I fast till lunch on Thursday. And oftentimes on Thursday, like before my workout on Thursday, and I usually break my fast after my workout, I'll just crave some pickle brine. Right. And that's really the sodium.
Yeah.
You know, and I like drink that and I'm like super energized and ready for my workout.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
you
awesome.
know, and it just feels great. And so a lot of times people will, and this is the cool thing about fasting. When you start to fast, your body will get more sensitive. This doesn't happen immediately, but as you get better and better at this, and you start building your fasting muscles and your fasting fitness level, which I talk about in the book, you get more sensitive to what your body really needs. So your cravings actually are really giving you more accurate signals on what you need.
Yeah.
And so if you're craving some salt, that's a sign, hey, I need a little bit more of those minerals.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Talk a little bit about some fasting protocols for cancer. Obviously, you experiencing this yourself really makes you, dive deep, right? Fasting, I know, Thomas Seyfried talks about how it really, dives into autophagy much deeper even than keto, and how to pulse fasting. Tell me what you learned.
Yeah, well, Thomas Seyfried, I really got some of the ideas from him because he talks about this press pulse treatment model, right? Where basically we want to metabolically press the cancer by getting our body into ketosis, restricting glucose, because we know that cancer cells, for the most part, the majority of them are obligate anaerobic metabolizers, right? Meaning that they basically can just break down sugar and they create a lot of lactic acid as a byproduct, and they can't burn fat and ketones effectively for fuel. Now, there may be some cancers. It's, there's some people out there, in vitro have shown that some cancer cells may be able to burn ketones, but hasn't really been demonstrated in human models yet. But we don't know. We don't fully know. We don't have enough research on that. But a majority of cancers are basically running off of sugar. And so if we can weaken them by reducing the impact, right, by basically bringing down our blood sugar and increasing our ability to run off ketones, we stress the cancer cells. Meanwhile, the ketones are actually very therapeutic and strengthening for normal cells. So they make our normal cells more stress resilient. And then we can pulse the body with oxidative therapies. This is really what chemotherapy and radiation do. They are powerful oxidative therapies. So they create massive amounts of free radical damage. In the conventional model, they're not metabolically pressing the cancer cells. So they're just blasting it with oxidative therapies in the hopes that the
things
cancer
like
cells
hyperbaric, ozone, all of that is what you're talking about. But again, it only really makes an impact once you stress the cancer cell via putting, into ketosis.
That's right. Right. So you have natural oxidative therapies like hyperbaric oxygen, IV vitamin C, IV ozone. The nice thing about that is those are non-toxic to human cells, to normal cells, I should say, and they're actually therapeutic. Oxygen is actually very therapeutic for normal cells. Vitamin C is, but they're cytotoxic to cancer cells. Oxygen, ozone, and vitamin C create massive oxidative stress in the cancer cells. So there's a great benefit there. But if you're going in a conventional model, which a lot of like Dr. Thomas Seyfried's research is utilizing this sort of, multi-therapeutic approach where you're doing a ketogenic diet, doing maybe some fasting, and he has like a partial fast kind of strategy, and then you're pulsing it with chemotherapy and radiation. And there's several different studies out there. There's a 2016 study where they had 3 different groups, right? So they had one group that did 24-hour fast and then did chemotherapy.
Yeah.
Another group that did 48-hour fast, then chemotherapy. And a third group that did 48-hour fast leading up to chemotherapy and then 24 hours afterwards. And they found that the longer the fast, right? So the third group, each group actually had less side effects than the control group. However, so they felt better, right? They didn't have quite the fatigue, they didn't have a lot of these major side effects that come with chemotherapy. The third group had the best results. They had little to no side effects, meaning that they went through chemotherapy and it was almost like, they barely noticed any change. And that was because the chemotherapy became a lot more isolated to the cancer cells, because now the normal cells, the body was in ketosis, right? So 48 hours fasting, and then 24 hours afterwards, they were in a state of ketosis. There was a lot of natural protection that the normal cells had. And then that chemotherapy was really gobbled up by the cancer cells. So it really isolated the impact there. And so it's powerful, right? Powerful strategy there. And there's other research as well. There's 2018 study where they had people do a 36-hour fast before chemotherapy and then 24 hours after. These people saw significantly better results, more uptake of the cancer cells with the chemotherapy, less side effects. So this is something you can do if you're doing conventional therapy. In fact, I highly recommend it. Even if you're underweight, because when you're dealing with cancer patients, you have a percentage, probably about 80%, that are really needing to lose weight, right? And so for those people, they can easily do that 3-day fast, right, around their chemotherapy. And that's great. And then doing intermittent fasting, where they're doing something like a 16 to 18-hour fast on their normal days and 6 to 8 hour eating window. And then for many people, they're getting chemotherapy 1 day a week, right? Like one strong treatment. And so they're able to kind of pair their fasting around that. And then they have like kind of normal feeding days around it. And then for other people, they're doing, chemotherapy for 3 days a month or something like that. So you kind of have to pair it based on the treatment model. But getting this sort of extended fast built into around the chemotherapy is great. Now, for the individuals that are dealing with cachexia, where you're losing weight, right? You're already underweight. We may not be able to do the fast depending on, how advanced the cachexia is. And that's really where like a fasting mimicking diet works, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Just really, and I recommend doing something where we're really restricting carbohydrates. So we're consuming, I try to do like about 60%, 40 to 60% of your normal calories for like a day or two around that chemotherapy. And this is for individuals that are cachexic or people that are just on a ton of medications that they kind of need to eat some food.
Yes.
And we're trying to prioritize lots of non-starchy vegetables and fats. So basically like having a big salad with avocados and olives, more or less. Right. And doing roughly about 1,200 calories or so of these kinds of salads, or you might do like a green smoothie or something. And that way you're able to get some of the calories in. Meanwhile, you're still getting your body in this state of ketosis to help prevent against the side effects of chemotherapy and still stimulate by restricting protein, keeping insulin levels down with this sort of diet. We're still getting a high level of autophagy. So your body's able to break down some of these damaged mitochondria and repair those, and and have less side effects with the chemotherapy.
Yeah, I some years ago I went to a seminar that Walter Longo. He is the author of, well, he calls it the Prolone diet, which is a partial fast in boxes, fasting mimicking diet. He's known to call it as well. But and he had scientists in from all over the world. And basically, the evidence, probably some of the studies that you read, these guys were there talking about that very system of pressing the cancer cells with a fast before chemo, after chemo, right? And the outcomes. I think the frustrating part about it for me was the outcomes were so good, and yet they have trouble getting this into hospitals. People are suffering, and yet you cannot argue with the science on this. And like you said, people who just can't do a water fast, fasting mimicking diet, which is a partial fast, eating small amounts of calories, this works. And yet, we're not hearing about it because all they want to do is sell a drug. Even, like I said, you can use natural therapies, with the pulse press, or you can use chemo. In the studies, there's more studies using chemo. Why? Because it's easier to fund them, right? But yet it works, and yet we have so little attention to it. Sad, actually.
Yeah, crazy. And most oncologists, especially when somebody has cachexia, they're having people drink Boost and Ensure and
Oh, no, exactly.
4,000 calories of trash, high fructose corn syrup, basically.
Yeah, no, and they tell their patients that a diet doesn't matter. Doesn't matter because they feel like, and of course, Seyfried in his book, and here on Cellular Healing TV, I've had 2 interviews with him. They don't care. They think diet has nothing to do with it, and they think you're just darn unlucky is why you got cancer. And Seyfried talks about that in his book. I mean, 30 years of cancer research, I think, at this point. But they just think you're unlucky, and they think diet doesn't matter. So of course, they just want to poison the cells, which again, if you do that with a weakened cancer cell, gosh, you could take your results to another level. Why don't you want to do that? Open your minds. Okay, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. But, there's a lot of promise with this. And I really think, ultimately, my goal with the book is not only to inspire people, obviously to help prevent neurodegenerative conditions, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, gut issues. People shouldn't have to suffer like I did with irritable bowel, cancer, right? I mean, cancer's skyrocketing. So these are strategies we can take to prevent that. And really, especially for slower growing cancers, I mean, this is really super powerful. The fast, more aggressive forms of cancer, I definitely recommend getting into an integrative clinic, getting a lot of these natural oxidative therapies. And you may even choose to do, targeted chemotherapy and radiation along with it. But this should be one of the foundational approaches that you're taking with really almost any health condition out there, doing some sort of fasting, intermittent fasting, partial fasting, extended fasting strategy, and living a fasting lifestyle. And then for the average individual out there who just wants to optimize their health, one of the best things you could do to prevent ever getting any sort of chronic disease is implementing a fasting lifestyle, just like what you teach and what I teach.
Yeah.
And when you start implementing this now, I mean, that's going to, I really think, if we can get everybody doing some sort of intermittent fasting, ideally a 16 to 18 hour fast, at least 2 or 3 times a week, and maybe a 24-hour fast 1 day a week. Along with good nutrition changes, healthy lifestyle, I really think we could reduce chronic disease by 98, 99%.
No, I agree. My 511 is 5 days of intermittent fasting, 1 day of a 24-hour fast, and 1 day of a feast. The feast, believe it or not, is as important as the fast. Well, look, there's the book right behind you, The Fasting Transformation. I'm sure you can get it on Amazon, or we'll put a link even here. So, but David, thank you. Just love the conversation. We just resonate on it, and will always be a guest here on Cellular Healing TV. We love you, man.
I always love talking to another fasting evangelist like myself. We got to get the message out.
Yeah, let's keep pushing it, man. Love having you. Thanks to one of our sponsors, CytoDefend. Look, at a time like this, I think that our immune system and keeping our immune system up right now is more important than ever. I can also tell you that I pay attention to the things that keep my immune system on par and healthy. So glad that CytoDefend is one of our sponsors here on Cell TV, and it's a product that I use, my family uses, and hopefully you'll check it out. And by the way, you can check it out with the link right here below. If you want to try a free bottle, you can actually get a free bottle, just pay the shipping. And I think you'll reorder after that, but check it out.
If you're listening to this podcast and want to access the amazing CytoDefend product Dr. Pompa just mentioned, please visit freeimmunity.com. Again, that's freeimmunity.com. Well, that's it for this week. The materials and content within this podcast are intended as general information only and are not to be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you would like to purchase some of the supplements mentioned on this show, please visit the site as seen on CHTV.com and use the code CHTV15 for 15% off. Again, that's as seen on CHTV.com. Use the code CHTV15 for 15% off. And as always, thanks for listening.